The most requested video so far, by a huge margin, is doing user authentication with Nuxt. Why? 3 reasons. First, because most substantial apps require some sort of user authentication and authorization. Second, because if most of your experience is with traditional single-page web apps, it's kind of baffling how a server-side rendered Vue app can do user auth on initial load. After all, the server can't access local storage or cookies directly. Third, because user auth is a multi-step process, and if you mess up a single step, it falls apart. And because it's on the server side, debugging is a bit more challenging, at least with the tools that front-end developers are used to. Fortunately, we have Nuxt Auth. It's a Nuxt module that makes all of this much simpler. Nuxt Auth is the official authentication module for Nuxt, maintained by Puyaparsa or Pi0 online. Nuxt Auth has solutions for both local login, that is, username and password-based authentication, and OAuth authentication, signing in with Facebook, GitHub, Google, Auth0, or Laravel Passport. Today, we're going to be only doing local login. However, much of what we'll learn will transfer if you're wanting to do an OAuth-based login. We're going to split this video up into 5 sections. There are timestamp links in the description below if you want to jump around. So first, we're going to be using auth.user, the current user equivalent that Nuxt Auth gives us. We're going to do this first, even though we won't see the results yet, because then, when we finish setting up loginWith in the options, it will tell us immediately that we succeeded, and that sort of feedback is very gratifying. Next, we'll be doing the login and registration forms. These are vital to any username and password-based authentication system. But they're going to vary a lot from app to app, and that variation is not vital to understanding Nuxt Auth. All that's important is that we're able to get a username or email and a password, and then call a function when the user hits submit. That's why we're going to bring in a component that I've previously created. If you want to see how it was made, there will be a link to that video in the description. Next comes the meat of the experience, configuring and using loginWith. And this is where things are most likely to get messed up if you're not careful. We're going to go over what each of the options means, and the different calls that loginWith makes. That is, the different steps it goes through, and then set all of that up in our app. The second that it works correctly, we'll get positive feedback because our username will display in the right side of the navbar. Then, we'll do user notifications and errors. Once again, we're going to cover this quickly because while it's necessary stuff, it's not core to understanding Nuxt Auth. And then finally, the crowning achievement, using Nuxt Auth's middleware to block off pages for anonymous users, while still providing a blazing fast server-side rendered page to users that are logged in. We'll also add a middleware of our own, one that only allows users with the admin property set to true. All right, we have our plan, and we know what we're going to do, so let's get started. Our first step is going to be to add the Auth and Axios modules to our Nuxt app. So we're using Yarn, so we'll go ahead and copy this and paste it into the command line. And we'll let those install. If we try to visit our page immediately, you'll see that there's an error. To fix this, let's go ahead and restart our server. Next, we'll have to add nuxt/auth to our modules array in nuxt.config.js. So we'll add that here. And that will allow us to use auth.loggedin and auth.user within our app. let's go ahead and use that in our navbar. And so that'll be in our default layout, or wherever you choose to put your navbar. So what we're going to do is we are going to use a VIF to determine what we're going to display. And so if $auth.loggedin is true, then we're going to display the username and a logout button. However, if it's false, if the user is not logged in, then we're going to display a login button and a register button. So $auth is something that Nuxt Auth gives us for free, and it's available everywhere. And it has two properties on it: logged in, which is a Boolean, and .user. .user will have whatever properties that you have on your user. So we can call things like .email and then display that. Now let's go ahead and fill out the rest of this with our links. We'll see that since there's no user logged in, we'll have the login and register links displaying. And let's go ahead and push those to the right side of the navbar. There we go. And now we know that when the username shows up here, that'll be a sign that we've correctly logged in. So here's what we've done in this section. We've installed Auth and Axios. And then we went ahead and added them to the modules. The modules is just an array of external libraries that work well with Nuxt. And depending on how you set up Nuxt, you might already have Axios installed, like I did. Finally, we took a look at the $auth object and how we can use it in our app. So it has logged in, which is a Boolean, and then user, which has whichever properties you decide to put on it. And here we have in our navbar, if the user is logged in, it'll show the email and a logout button. Otherwise, it will link us to login and register pages. And so even though we can't see this yet, it does provide us a nice link to the login and register pages that we'll be creating in the next section. And it'll also mean that the second that we get logged in, then we'll have immediate feedback and know that we're successful. In this section, we're going to create two new pages, login and register. We'll start with login. We'll set up our login header here, just so we can see that the route's working. Good, everything seems to be flowing nicely. Next we'll need the actual form, and for that we're going to use a component, since the form will look very similar in both login and register. Call it user auth form. Because the details of this form are not essential to understanding Nuxt Auth, we're going to go ahead and copy and paste it from another app. There's a lot here, but what we'll be concentrating on are the props that we'll need to pass in. If you want to know more about this component, then you can go ahead and look up this video on how we built it, and I'll go ahead and provide a link to that in the description below. So what we're going to need to pass in is the submit form function, which will be called whenever we click the submit button. Then we'll need to pass in the button text, which is what's displayed on the submit button. Finally, we can optionally pass in hasName, and that will make it show the name field. And so that's something we'll want on the user registration, but not the login. hasName will default to false. We'll put in our button text first because that's easy. We'll just have it say login. Then to submit form, we will pass in a function, and we'll go ahead and call that function loginUser. Then in our script, we'll need to import the user auth form. Then we'll put that in our components hash so we can use it. And in our methods hash, we'll put loginUser, which for now, we'll just call an alert. That's just so we can see that it's working. So you can see we have our login form, and we need to go ahead and provide it with a valid email, and we'll hit login, and we'll see that everything's flowing as we expect. We aren't going to do the actual login in this section. That'll come next section when we learn how to use Nuxt Auth's loginWith method. But we will take a quick sneak peek at what's passed in with the login info. So we'll go ahead and put in a debugger and open our inspector so it catches. And then we will put in something fake and log in with it. This will catch, and see that our login info contains the email and password that we put in. Great, so we've got the login form displaying, and when we hit submit, we are passing up all the info we'll need to a method right here. Let's go ahead and repeat that for our register page. And we can go ahead and just copy a lot of this and change some of the words. We'll also add the hasName prop and make that true. Then you'll see that we can visit the register page, and it has the same nice form, except with the option for putting in a name, and the button says register. And of course, it will call out to a completely different method. So to review, in this section, we created our login and register pages. And we created them by using the user auth form component. And for us, it looks like this, but you don't have to understand this in particular. You can use whatever styles you want in your user auth form. The important thing is that when you hit the submit button, then it will call out to a function. And then you'll get the information that the users put in. You'll need at least 2 items of information: a unique ID, such as the email in our case, and then a password. Then you can ask for extra information. In our case, this is the name. Now we've come to the core of this video, the most important part, and the part that's easiest to mess up. That's right, we're going to actually log in using the loginWith function. And to make that work, we're going to have to set up our options and our API endpoints in the correct way. So let's go to our login page, and in our loginUser function, we'll go ahead and call loginWith. And we're going to be using the local strategy. So that's the first argument. If you wanted to do an OAuth authentication, then you would give the name of the OAuth strategy you're using, such as Facebook or GitHub. All right, so the name of the strategy is the first argument, and then you send in a hash, and the most important part of that hash is the data hash. Here, the fields given are username and password. in our particular API, we'll be wanting email and password. And that's fine having that variation. It's whatever your server expects. That's the data you should send. So here we will send in our data hash, and our login info actually contains all of the data fields we'll need. In this case, email and password. So let's go ahead and try to run this. And to make it easier to run things, we'll go into our user auth form and put the default values of email and password to a correct combination, and that way we won't have to type it in every time. This is, of course, a temporary measure, and we'll revert that before actually making the commit. Now we'll give this a try and see what happens. So we'll see that it automatically made an API call to API/API/auth/login, because that is the default value of the login endpoint. So this is a good time to introduce the options. These are the default options for a token-based workflow. So in nuxt.config.js, we will put under the auth hash, we'll put a strategies hash, and then under that a local hash, and then finally under that an endpoints hash. And if you had different strategies like GitHub, then you would put that under the strategies hash as well, and it would have its own options. So let's go ahead and copy these, and we can start making edits. We'll start with editing the URL of login to make sure it's the one that our backend accepts. So note that we have set the base URL of Axios to this. So we've already got /API in there. That makes this first /API redundant. Notice how it had been /API/API/auth/login. So we'll go ahead and get rid of that. And then we will go ahead and make it just to /sessions. So we're using the post method, so that will create a new session. Then we'll go ahead and keep the property name as token. And as a reminder, so what I'm putting here is not necessarily what you should put in your app. This is something you have to customize for your own backend. Let's go ahead and see it working in our app. So we hit login, and this is successful. We've gotten back a hash that has the token key on it, and that is exactly what we've set it up to receive. We can also go to the Application tab and see that we've gotten the token, and it's set in cookies and in local storage. And double checking, that is the same one. So if we've successfully logged in and have the correct token in our application, why are we not seeing it up here? That's because we need to make a second call to actually get the user. And to do that, we'll need to edit this hash. In our backend, it's sessions/user. We will keep the method name get, and then let's go ahead and check what data we get back. So here, we see that there's an error, and it looks like it is a 401 unauthorized. So there's an issue here, and the issue is that the token type that we're expecting in our backend is not bearer, it's just blank. I think that it is best practice to use the bearer token type, and that's why it's a default. But your server might not follow the best practice. And so it's good that they have this option you can set. So let's go ahead and try it again with our new bearer type. And it is a success. We are now logged in. We can reload the page and we'll still be logged in because our token has been stored in both local storage and cookies. And even better, so if we go to our settings and we turn off JavaScript, then we reload the page, we are still signed in. And we can go ahead and visit the entire site. Of course, we can't play any videos because that requires JavaScript. And so it would be silly for someone to actually browse our site with JavaScript disabled, but you get the idea. This is just one extra thing, one extra bonus that Nuxt gives you. Now, to finish out our feature set, let's make our logout button work, and then let's make the register page work. Making the logout button work is fairly easy, as long as you know the API endpoint in your server that will log you out. So for us, it's sending a delete request to sessions. So now that we have these options set, we need to go to the button itself, and on a click event, we'll just call $auth.logout. And now when we hit log out, it automatically logs us out. Making register work will take a little bit more effort, but not that much because it shares quite a bit of similarities with login. The first thing we'll want to do is update our default data to include a name, and then we'll update the email so it's not a duplicate. Now we've got our register page set up for easy clicking, but what do we do now? So the first thing you should know is that Nuxt Auth does not give you a register endpoint. We are going to have to create the new user ourselves. And so we'll go ahead and do that. So we've got our registration info, and we can just send that to our server using Axios. And we'll go ahead and post, and in our server, it'll be to /users, which will end up being localhost blah 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 /API/users. And then we'll send in the registration info that includes our name, email, and address as the second argument. All right, so if we've made that call, we've now registered our user. And let's go ahead and make this asynchronous real quick. And this will be returning some data. But you know what? We don't need that data. Why? Because we don't need a user back. We have their username and password right here in our registration info. So let's go ahead and just use it. That's right. We'll just be calling loginWith again. And this time, we're just changing the name of the info we're feeding in. Yeah, registration info has a name on it, but our server's just gonna ignore that. And there we go. Once we've made those two calls, we have created the user, and then we've logged in. So let's go ahead and try it out. We will hit the register button, and it has created our user and logged us in. Perfect. Let's go ahead and clean up these defaults we put in there. We don't want all of our users signing in as us. And then we'll do a quick review of what we learned this section. So we learned how to use the loginWith method. The first argument is the strategy we're using, and the second argument is a hash, and one of the keys on that hash is data. and we feed it in email and password. You can also feed it in username and password or whatever login info you want. And then to get that to work, we'll need to set our endpoints in nuxconfig. So under auth, you have the strategies hash, and we've set local, which matches the name of the strategy here. You could also set stuff like Facebook and GitHub. And then under local, we have our endpoints and our token type that we've set. Token type by default is bearer, but your server may not process the token in that way. And so we've changed ours to just an empty string. And then on the endpoints, for the login, logout, and user routes, you'll need to customize those based on what your server wants. You can set the URL, which is the API it's called, and remember, the base URL property for Axios applies here. Then you can set the method, post, put, delete, get, etc. And then the property name. And what property name does is when you're receiving the data back, it calls that property name on the data to get the actual data that's used. And this can be multiple ones chained together, like here. So the loginWith method first calls login to get the token, and then uses that token to call user. Logout is used in auth.logout, and we use that in our logout button, and we can just call it really simply like this. Then, to register, we just have to use our registration info to create a user by calling to the API, and then calling loginWith, just like we did in our login page. You now have enough information to go use Nuxt Auth in your own app. But there's more that Nuxt Auth can do for you, as well as some edge cases that you may want to cover. So in the next section, we're going to be looking at how errors can be handled using Nuxt Auth, and throw in some user notifications. And then in the section after that, we'll be looking at the Auth Middleware that comes with Nuxt Auth, and create our own middleware that will restrict where users can go based on whether they're an admin or not. Let's start off with a seemingly simple feature, and then we'll see all sorts of edge cases come up. So that feature is when we log in, we want to see a notification down here that says, "Thanks for logging in," and then the user's name. And so we've already got some stuff set up here. And so we can call out to the store and dispatch to an action we've made called snackbar/set snackbar. And the arguments we pass to this dispatch, to this vuex action, are text and, optionally, color. By default, it's going to be green. And so for the text, let's just do "Thanks for signing in." All right, let's see this in action. So first, we will use a set of email and password that is correct. All right, it says "Thanks for signing in." Great. Now let's go ahead and log in with a username and password that is not correct. And it still says "Thanks for signing in." So let's go ahead and see if we can get an error value from this. So first we're going to have to set this to async and set that to await, and we'll get the response. And then we'll set the debugger there. All right, let's give this a shot, see if we can catch an error. No, we cannot catch an error. It's just going to give us this status code. All right, so if we can't reach this piece of code, there is one thing we can still do. We can use a try-catch block. So we will stick this in the try, and we'll go ahead and take out the debugger. And then in catch, we will try to get the error argument, and we'll go ahead and log that. All right, so now we'll enter an incorrect combination, and we'll see that we're just getting a request failed with status code 401. So that's not super helpful, but since that is the most likely error we're going to get, we will go ahead and translate it for the user. So we'll set the color to red and the text to "There was an issue signing in. Please try again." So a little bit vague since we don't know precisely what the error is. And go ahead and try it again. All right, that's what we are expecting. So this is the way that we need to catch errors when using Nuxt Auth. That is the main lesson of this section, that you need to use a try-catch block. But while we're here, let's go ahead and do some nice stuff for our users. So in thanks for signing in, we can go ahead and use the current user. And because we're using await here, we'll know that we've already signed in and we'll have access to that. Then after that, we will use the router's push method to redirect the user to the home page instead of staying in the login page. So let's go ahead and see this in action. All right, that's a much better experience. And so the user has a lot more cues than just seeing their email appear up here. Now let's take what we've learned and apply it to our register function. And so we'll go ahead and paste it in here and edit as needed. So we will of course need this first, and we'll need to put in the registration info instead of the login info. And just change a little bit of wording. All right, excellent. We will test it out, and we'll go ahead and use a name that's already used. And we'll see that the error is correct. And then we use a new email, and it registers and gives us this nice notification. In this section, we learned that to handle errors in Nuxt Auth, we need to use try and catch. And we also added some nice quality of life features for our users, such as sending them notifications for success and for failure, and redirecting them. We went over all this quickly because it's not strictly part of Nuxt Auth. But in the next section, we will cover a core part of Nuxt Auth, which is the Auth Middleware, and we'll see how to expand on it. So we have our working login and register pages, but users that aren't logged in can still access every single page on the site. We'd like to be able to restrict access to certain pages based on whether a user is logged in and different attributes of the user. The way that you might do this in VueRouter is not available. We don't have those hooks in Nuxt. But there's a new way to do it, and that is through middleware. So Nuxt Auth comes with the Auth Middleware automatically. So we're putting that in the admin page, which means that, oh, hey look, we were redirected from admin to login. And if we try to go to one of admin's child pages, videos for example, then it will still redirect us. So with this one line, we've been able to protect the admin page and all of its children. But that's not quite good enough. So if we register someone, then no matter who they are, they can still access the admin page. So now, for this case, we need to make a custom middleware. And so there are two ways we could do it. We could stack it with the auth middleware, so auth runs first, and then admin runs. But I don't see a whole lot of upside to that, since we don't want to assume that auth will always run before admin. And if we're checking that the user is an admin, we'll already be checking that they're logged in. So let's create a new middleware called auth admin. So the basic form for a middleware, you export default a function, and that function has a context object, and we can go ahead and make this async as well. And that context will contain a lot of things, the first of which we'll care about is $auth. Let's go ahead and extract our user from that. All right, so we have our user, and if we have our user and the user is an admin, then we can go ahead and let the user in. Otherwise, we'll want to redirect them to the home page. Redirecting them, we'll use the Nuxt function. And then we'll go ahead and get the store as well. And we'll go ahead and dispatch an error message. Now, when we click the admin link as a non-admin user, it gives us an error. And when we log in as an admin user, then it allows us to visit the page. Of course, that's not the best UI, showing people a link that they're not supposed to click. So let's go ahead and fix that. So in our default layout, we'll go ahead and add a vif here. And so if we have auth.user and auth.user is an admin, then we will show the admin button. And we'll see that it is still visible when we are signed in as an admin, but then when we log out, it is no longer visible, no longer tempting people. But if we type it in, then well, it just completely errors on us. And that is because server-side rendering does not like the Nuxt function. So we can replace it with the redirect function. Honestly, I think that's better named anyways. All right, so now we can go ahead and type in admin. And oh good, look, it redirects us. But turns out server-side rendering doesn't like our snack bar, so we don't see that message. If you have the type of app where you're going to have a lot of users that don't really understand the system, getting linked to pages that are behind this sort of wall, then you may want to redirect them to some sort of page that asks them to log in and shows an explicit message saying they don't have permissions. But for our purposes, this is fine. So to review, in this section, we first learned about the Auth Middleware, which comes out of the box with Nuxt Auth. It will block off pages and make sure that users that aren't logged in won't be able to access them. And it will also do it for all the children of the pages that you mark with it. Then we created the Auth Admin custom middleware, which also makes sure that the user is an admin. And then if they're not, we show them a message and redirect them to a different page. We have learned a lot in this video, so let's do a quick review that hits just the highlights. So we have the $auth variable, which is available in all of your components. And it contains logged in, which is a Boolean, or user, which is something you fed in from the server. And it also contains several methods, like logout and loginWith. LoginWith is probably the core method for Nuxt Auth, and it looks really simple here. And once you have your options figured out, it is simple. But you have to make sure to line up those options with what your API expects. So first, with the data you're sending, you have to make sure that you're getting the correct information. So for us, it's email and password. Or it could be username and password or something like that. And the rest of the configuration happens in nuxt.config.js. So under auth, strategies, local, we have a set of several options. So token type, which is by default bearer, we can change to any type we want. And then we have an endpoints hash, and we need to define login, logout, and user. So these are the URL that we'll call and the method that we'll use. And then for login and user, because they return data, the key that will have that data. So when you call loginWith, what it's going to do is it will first call to whatever URL you put in login, and then it will take the result from that, the response, and grab the key that you put into property name and assign that as the token. That token will then be sent up in every Axios request, including the request to user, which is sent right after login returns. And from that, you get your actual user. All right, so we've defined all these endpoints, and they're used in loginWith, and loginWith is used again in register as well as login, because in register, we'll just create the new user and then log in with them. And also note that we're wrapping this in a try-catch block. That seems to be the best way to handle errors when using Nuxt Auth. Then finally, we have our middleware. So we have auth by default, and we created our own, Auth Admin. And we have to be sure to use redirect rather than next. And that is all for this video. If you want to learn more, go ahead and check out the documentation. It provides details on all the other capabilities of Nuxt Auth, including, but not limited to, all those other providers you can use. Once again, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. There are a lot of videos just like this on different topics, and there are going to be a lot more soon.